Every year, people from around the world come to America in hopes of a better life. According to Pew Research Center, out of a population of 328,239,523, 13.6% of our U.S. population is foreign-born. In the news and in the media, we often hear about the controversies surrounding immigration, but what we often do not talk about is the difficult and lengthy process that one must go through to become a naturalized citizen. In order to understand this concept a little better, we must also consider the definition of an immigrant versus a refugee. An immigrant is a person who comes here willingly by choice. A refugee is forced to leave their country as a result of poverty, political unrest, gang violence, or natural calamities. Recognizing these definitions will allow us to understand the circumstances of these groups of people. I brought in immigration lawyer John Egan and immigration social work professor Wendy Lum to talk about the process of citizenship as well as their own personal experiences working with this population.
I'm John Egan, and I am the director of the immigration clinic here at the Richardson School of Law. The first time I started working with refugees was with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. I worked in South Central Africa. There had been a large civil war, and people escaped in every direction from Mozambique, and I worked in Malawi, the nearby country, and also in Zimbabwe. When the war finally settled out, I was transferred over back into Mozambique to help with the resettlement of refugees. So that was really my first experience with the whole idea of displaced people and people who are moving in large numbers across national borders. Then I came back to the United States and went to law school. I was not a lawyer at that time. So it was very interesting to realize that that whole area of work, refugees and displaced people, fits within the context of immigration law. And so that's what I studied while I was at law school.
Hi, so my name is Wendy Lum. I work in higher education, teaching, and I have previous work experience in human services, social services. So while I live in Hawaii now, I've been living here for 6 years. For the purposes of this interview, I want to share my past work experience, both professionally and personally, working in the immigrant community and refugee community as well. So my experience has been from the very earlier days out of college, working at a legal aid in immigration issues and helping community members find. Our agency would provide legal services to the immigrant community, individuals seeking asylum, individuals who might be immigrants and also experiencing domestic violence. And so it was a legal services job for about 3 years. I was a paralegal, immigration paralegal. And then from there, I decided to go back to school and get my master's in social work. And I have had a strong interest in working with the immigrant community, particularly the Latino community. So I am an immigrant myself, born in Guatemala, and my family migrated to the US in the 80s. So we settled in the DC metro area. And so my kind of professional goals after that became very much connected to my personal experiences, but also being able to give back.
In order to understand this concept further, I asked experts, what does it mean to be an immigrant living in the United States?
Honestly, the thing that really sort of stands out about the migration experience is that someone has to be really willing to make a big change in their life. You know, you're leaving your family, you're leaving your home area, you're leaving the culture, maybe the language, everything that you know and are familiar with, you have to leave it behind. And when you come here, you find, well, America is pretty amazing in terms of how many different kinds of people are here, how diverse our culture is, and yet it's not 100% welcoming. There seem to be factions in our population that resist the idea of allowing outsiders in. So people get a mixed experience. First, it's this is America. There's most everything that you could want to have here. There's an amazing amount of personal freedom, a lot of really good things wrapped up in the mix. But there's also this undercurrent of xenophobia, the dislike of outsiders. And that's a problem that everybody has to confront one way or another if you're here.
It's an amazing strength to have to be an immigrant in the US. I think that you very much you become very adaptable. I always think of it as like being bilingual, bicultural, just having this double experiences, right? Of being new to a country, learning a language. If English isn't your first language, some people migrate from countries that already speak English, right? So that might not be a challenge for them. But those who do not, like myself, had to learn English as a second language, right? So then you adopt this kind of bilingual identity, bilingual cultural identity, right? And also culturally too, what you are used to growing up, now adapting to what might be considered a more dominant culture in the US that might be different from your own, right? So then you're adopting these two identities. So it makes you very wholesome and very dimensional, I think, being an immigrant and having those experiences.
So what is actually involved in the citizenship process?
It's very complicated from my understanding, having been through it personally, but then also having been in the capacity to help facilitate resources for community members who are immigrants, perhaps seeking legal assistance around their immigration status. It's definitely very complex.
As Citizenship and Immigration Services Program breaks this process down into 10 steps. The first step is to determine if you are already a citizen. If you were born in America or obtained citizenship from your parents automatically after birth, then you do not have to go through this process.
Well, of course, everybody who is born here, if you're born inside the United States, you're automatically a U.S. citizen. Some very small exceptions to that, but that's generally the rule. If you're born here, you're a citizen. If you come here any other way, you have to go through some kind of a process to become a citizen. And not everybody who comes is eligible. For example, if you come into the United States without papers, as many people do, we now have 10 to 50 million undocumented migrants who are here inside the United States, they are not eligible for citizenship. They can't even take the first step in the process. But everybody else who does come in legally also has a process to go through.
The next step is to determine if you are eligible for citizenship. On the website of the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services Program, there is a M480 worksheet. This worksheet helps you determine if you are eligible for citizenship. Some of the requirements are that you must be 18, you must have a green card, and you must live in the U.S. for at least 5 years.
Typically, it involves getting permanent residence, what we call a green card. That's the first step. For most people, you have to be in that permanent resident status. You have to hold your green card for 5 years before you're eligible to apply for citizenship. They make it a little bit less for people who are married to U.S. citizens, and that's to encourage family unity. That's a positive value for American immigration. Family unity is an important value. You have to wait it out. And during that time, you have to be a person of good moral character. You have to show that you can support yourself. You have to follow the laws. And then you also need to learn English language. And you need to learn civics. You need to learn something about the American way of government. And if you are willing to do all of that, the process is pretty straightforward. Not as inexpensive as it used to be. It's now up over $700 just to apply.
One example of a group who cannot obtain citizenship to this day are the Dreamers.
It's called Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. This is a program that was initiated by the Barack Obama administration some years ago. As I mentioned, we have 10 to 15 million undocumented people here in the United States. Some of them came across the border with children, sometimes very small children. So it stands to reason those children did not do anything wrong. Those children did not make a decision to violate any law. And yet they've grown up here. They look just like you or me. They're our neighbors. Our kids go to school with them. They're on the same sports teams. They're here in our community. They had tried to set up a legalization program for them, and it just kept failing. It never got through Congress. Our Congress is a little polarized right now. They never managed to get the DREAM Act approved. So actually was a number of college professors who wrote a letter to President Obama saying, yes, if you follow the law like this, it is legal to give these people some status. It's not permanent status. So this DACA program was initiated. If you were under 16 and came in during certain years and you have not violated any laws and you have gone to school or joined the military, we will allow you to get a work card. And the work card is permission, one, to be employed, to go to school, but also to stay during the period of time that's on the card. Now, they're only given out in 2-year increments. It means it has to be renewed every 2 years. It's not a permanent program. So that's the downfall, the limitation. The reason that it's not a permanent fix is that it's only temporary. These young people do not have a green card. They're not eligible for citizenship. Originally, the way that the program was first set out, they were allowed to join the military. And that would have been a pathway to citizenship. But Congress said, no, that's not really okay. That's not what we intend. And so that's where the program is. There have been attempts to expand it, and there have been attempts to restrict it. And the courts have had a lot to say about it. It went up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court declined to stop the program. They said, no, you could stop the program, but you can't stop it that way. So they kind of dodged the question. So we still have the program right now. It's in place. It's not permanent. And in my opinion, I think that we should be looking out for these young people. We should just include them in our community. But that's not a universal opinion. At this point, the DACA program does not link to a pathway to citizenship. Now, that's what they're talking about doing right now in Congress. And that question is up and before our current congressional group in the Senate and House of Representatives. But it's not clear that it's passing. But the process is there and it is available.
The laws in this country are very complicated when it comes to who is eligible and who isn't eligible for a certain status, along with misconceptions of, you often hear folks say like, well, why don't people just get in the back of the line and wait their turn, right? Well, it's not simple. So there's definitely a lot of different policies and laws and restrictions that come along with that.
Once you have determined that you are eligible for citizenship, you must fill out the N-400. It costs $640 to file this form. When you add on the $85 biometric fee, the total cost to apply for citizenship costs $725. However, there are a few exceptions. Applicants 75 and older do not have to pay the biometrics fee, but still have to pay the $640, whereas military applicants filing under sections 328, 329, or the INA are not required to pay any fee. Fourth step of the process involves completing the form, filing it, and paying the fees. Then you will take your biometrics test, which is a test that will require you to take your picture, record your fingerprint, and your signature. For those taking the biometrics test, the USCIS will send an appointment notice that tells you where and when you will take your test. After taking the biometrics test, the next thing you need to do is complete an interview with the USCIS. After that, you will receive a decision regarding your N-400. After you have passed that step, you will receive a notice to take your oath. This means you are almost done with the process, and now you have one of two things left to do. One, take the oath. And the last step of the process, according to the USCIS, is to understand your own rights as a now naturalized citizen. So now that we know about the process itself, what can we do to improve it?
I think there are improvements that could be made. Right now, it's taking almost 2 years for someone from the start of their application to the day they get sworn in. It can be up to 2 years. When I first started practicing immigration law, it was about 3 or 4 months. So just the bureaucracy that is involved could be seriously streamlined, and that would be a good thing for everybody involved. In addition, I think that there are some inconsistencies from place to place and time to time. We recently were in an administration that was discouraging people from becoming citizens. And now we are now again sort of encouraging people. So that kind of inconsistency, I think, is not helpful. I would also, to me, and this is a very personal opinion, I don't think there should be as high a financial barrier to becoming a citizen. I think it would be better for everybody, our country and the people who are applying, if this was just something easy and inexpensive to do. I think we should be encouraging everybody who's here, and personally I would include those undocumented people. I think that everybody who is here should be made part of our political community. Everybody should have a voice. And to have a voice, you really need to be a citizen. I think the current administration, for all of their good intentions, has also been troubled by the magnitude of the problems that we're facing in immigration. That whole problem that we're seeing on the southern border with people coming up from Central America and other countries, now we're seeing Haitians appearing at our southern border. All of these things tend to be a little bit of a difficulty in terms of getting their priorities set.
Is it easier to obtain citizenship in Hawaii or on the continent, and why?
Well, in terms of the technical parts of the process, I don't think that there's a big difference. All of immigration law is federal, so it's the federal government that's doing it. It isn't controlled by state governments. So there isn't that variability in the law. However, different communities do have different types of either welcoming or not so welcoming attributes. I think Hawaii is a relatively good place to be an immigrant because we have a pretty mixed community here. We have a community that has always had migration ever since the island was uninhabited. People have arrived here from someplace, and it's part of the culture, I believe, that there's a sort of welcoming idea that sits behind the idea of aloha and much of how local culture functions. And so I think that immigrants don't feel out of place here. But that's sort of a social cultural thing as opposed to a legal thing.
What are the common misconceptions about these groups of people, and how does that affect their pathway to citizenship?
In anti-immigrant circles, you're going to hear a lot of, they're coming here to take all our benefits. They're coming here to take our jobs. They're coming here to get on welfare, things like that. Maybe because I'm a social worker in training and I'm an advocate and I feel very strongly about this. I think, like I said, individuals don't leave their country because they want to. They leave because they have to out of survival. And so a lot of families might be fleeing difficult situations in their home countries, right? Systems that they don't feel protected by. And so they have to uproot and come to a different country to find a new way of living, right, of survival. I think in the US, we're very fortunate that there's a lot of resources. There's a lot of things that the US has to offer, right? I generally very wholeheartedly feel that individuals come to work and to provide for their families and to live a better life, right? I think it affects all different levels, right? In the individual level, how you communicate with your neighbor, how you communicate with the people in the community on the more individual side of things, and definitely on the community in like local elections and what individuals have resources access to in the schools or in the community and clinics, and whether they have access to healthcare or not. But then also on a very macro level too, on the federal system, like what laws are passed or what bills are passed in favor of or in support of. DACA, the Deferred Action Childhood Arrival Act, has been, in Congress back and forth, right, with different administrations. So we're yet to see that there is some sort of opportunity for individuals who came here when they were children out of no choice of their own, right? And then eventually found out that they didn't have any illegal status according to a written, document. And so, but yet they're Americans in all definition of the word, of being good constituents in the community, seeking higher education, giving back, right? And so that's one example of that we can look at as a great example of immigrants who contribute to society, and that there are misconceptions around. But when you look at this, you realize, oh, wow, a lot of young folks who are eligible for DACA are scientists, lawyers, teachers.
A lawyer's perspective on children being separated from their families at the border.
Well, that was, I think, one of the most unpleasant episodes in the whole period of time in these last 5 years. As people are now going back and going through the paperwork on that, it looks like that was intentionally done. It was not an accident. It was not something that just, whoops, we somehow lost control of this process. The idea was intentionally to deter people from coming. Well, it turns out that doesn't work. The numbers kept coming, and now they're even a little bit up. So it wasn't a deterrent. The other effects of the families, is still in place. Now, even right now, we're doing this interview in October of 2021. That stuff happened 2 years ago, and those children are not all yet reunited with their families. There are still children who are in custody and in foster care who have not been reunited with their biological families. So it's a terrible situation. It should never have been done in the first place. What can be done about it now? I think the new administration has taken this problem and tried to break it down. One difficulty is actually tracing. If you're talking about young children, they don't know how to get in contact on their own with their parents. Now, this is maybe a little bit more detailed than you want to know, but as you probably read in my resume, I used to work for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. We had a way of dealing with that. In a mass migration, you took those little children and you put a bracelet on them that had all of their biological information on it, and it didn't come off until they were reunited. That is not a high-tech thing. That's something that you do when you go to a sports event. They put a bracelet on you. You do it when they go to a concert. It's not. Now, there is a high-tech aspect to that. UNHCR embeds a chip in that little bracelet with all their biological information. So they could have done it right. They didn't do it right. It's a mess. And I think that some of these children probably will never see their parents again.
So what can we do to support immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers?
Well, of course, we're a democracy, so voting is really helpful. There are our representatives in Congress are kind of positive on this whole issue, and that's a good thing. I am a pretty strong believer in this community-based stuff. Probably the most important part of the whole resettlement process is, in fact, local churches. Local churches are the groups that take in refugees, take in immigrants, and give them assistance. And it's a logical sort of process. Those are our community organizations that already exist in most of our communities and have a mission to do positive things. So that's been, historically, that's been a really big part of the process, is the faith-based communities. And everybody can participate, whatever your particular beliefs, or even if you have no beliefs. The other nonprofits are also out there. Find them, support them, donate, volunteer. We can all do this. The thing that comes up repeatedly is the language problem. People come from a lot of different places, and mastering English is not a simple language. It can take people more than 3 or 5 years to really become fluent in English. So the language barrier is a little bit of a problem. Now, I don't think they should reduce the barrier. I think that's important if people are going to be here and be part of our community. Learn the language so that you can get along. That doesn't mean give up your own language. I think we're enriched by having more languages spoken in our communities. But I think the solution to that is to provide more assistance to people who are applying. get those ESL classes up and running. They used to do this in the community colleges. Funding issues have caused some problems. But that would be one, making the language issue less of a barrier.
Yeah, I think it's going to vary by community. Coming from the East Coast, definitely there's legal aids, there's Catholic Charities, there's Lutheran Social Services, there's just other organizations that are able to serve all communities regardless of their immigration status. And so I've seen similarities in Hawaii as well, right, with Catholic Charities and other legal aid and other different community-based organizations that provide services where they don't have an eligibility criteria, perhaps that serves that you have to be a certain status to find out what the resources are in the community. I think from a social cultural perspective, however, I do think that it's important for students like you are, your peers now, and for members in the community to really take the time to inform themselves of what social issues impact immigrant communities, right? Regardless of where they might be in that citizenship path, there's other factors like language barriers, like access to resources, like that we need to understand that until you really are in the shoes of someone else who might be learning how to adapt in a new country and have a new life in a new country, you don't really kind of understand what that might be like. From having worked in the community, I think it's a complicated process, understanding the laws are, understanding what your rights are, finding legitimate legal services versus services that are going to take advantage of your needs so that they can charge you more to get to what you need, right? I think it starts with educating yourself about the experiences of immigrants, right? I truly believe in my heart, coming from my personal experiences, that people who migrate to the US or to Europe or other places in the world seeking whether it's political asylum, whether it's fleeing violence in their communities, fleeing domestic violence in their family, whatever it may be, individuals don't uproot and leave their countries because they want to. They do so because there is a reason why, right? They feel they have to for survival. And so I think it starts with empathizing and understanding that concept first, and then seeing, what other supports there could be, right, for individual families who are seeking refuge in other countries.
Here is where Pacific Gateway Center comes in. Pacific Gateway Center was created to empower immigrants to rebuild their lives with hope, respect, and dignity. They offer social service programs which include, but are not limited to, housing assistance, interpretive services for non-English speakers, immigration and naturalization services, and employment and entrepreneurship opportunities. What advice would you give to a person who wants to obtain citizenship in the United States?
One of the key things, and I say this with a little bit of humor, behave yourself. The good moral character part of the citizenship is not an abstract thing. If you violate the laws, you're going to have a hard time becoming a citizen. It's pretty easy these days to violate the laws. There's all kinds of things and some of these things are confusing. For example, in many states, it's no longer against the law to use marijuana, but it's a federal law still. And if you are in the state of Oregon and you think puffing up on the weekend is a great thing and everybody's doing it, you could still have a serious problem with your citizenship because you've violated a federal law. So learning what the rules are, learning to behave yourself. If you like to drink, drink at home. Don't go out driving. That's a really bad thing. So those sort of things. Beyond that, I think really just getting to know how things work here is really important. Learning how to integrate and assimilate. Now, I am also a great believer in the diversity of the United States. I think people come from different cultures, and it's great that they bring their cultures along with them. But we have to meld them in some way, and that becomes part of the citizenship process, is to know how things work here, participate in democracy, and to also follow the rules.
What advice or knowledge do you want to give the people watching this video?
Everyone has a different story, and it really just comes down to people wanting to take care of their families and work hard just like anybody else who has lived in this country and was privileged enough to be born in this country, not have to worry about their immigration status and have access to as many resources as they can. Encourage students to look at professions that work with all communities, right? Whether it's social work, whether it's legal services, whether, pursue careers in different human services. If you're interested in working with vulnerable communities, whether it's because their experiences as immigrants or other abilities or other vulnerable communities that they can support and help.
Well, that's a big question. I would say the main thing is we should all pay attention to our own histories, because we all got here from someplace. My own family comes from Europe. Honestly, my father's family came to the United States because there was a famine in Ireland. They ran out of food. More people left Ireland during those years. That's the mid-1800s. More people left Ireland than stayed. So the population was reduced by half. And that's why we have so many Irish people in America. They're also in Australia, other places. If you look into your own history, you'll find that we're all immigrants. And if you look at the present moment, there's not a very good reason to pick on those people. It's a much better idea to say, okay, here's how it works, join in. I think the most important thing, if we were trying to just consolidate this into one idea, is the United States is a country of immigration. And it doesn't make sense to say, okay, that's the past. No, that's the current moment, and it is also the future. And if you don't see that, look around. You're going to have to get used to it. It's better you enjoy it and find it to be a worthwhile thing than to resist.